Let's talk about this. Hi, my name is Jackie, and today we're talking maimai buttons. In conjunction with the release of a certain controller, I'm going to talk about the types of maimai buttons that are available on the market, as well as the parts that make a button. Before we start, you might be wondering, who is this guy? Who is he to tell me about buttons? Why should I trust him? For starters, I've played maimai for about 8 years on the official cabinet. I have a Momokami, plenty of experience on how an official cabinet button should feel like, and some experience on tweaking buttons. With that out of the way, let's get started with... I'm going to simplify this into 4 different types of buttons. Let's start with the official one. Well, there's nothing much to say, is it? It's the official, the reference, the founder's edition, and it's the most expensive out there. Okay, let's move on. The second one is what we call Rabbit's button. In China, some guy named Rabbit decided to make his own buttons for the community, and what he came up with is basically the alternative to the official buttons. It is the closest thing to the official ones in terms of feel, and it's affordable. The only downside of this is that it is not as durable as the official one. And we have the third one, the one that comes with a certain controller, Yuan's buttons. It's one of the cheapest options out there, more durable than Rabbit's button. However, it doesn't feel that great, more on that later, and can only be described as playable. And last but not least, the shitty ones. So, what are the shitty ones? Shitty ones are what you basically find sold on Taobao. Aside from the 3 reputable ones I just mentioned, 2 examples of them is this. First one, this one looks similar to the official ones. However, they have a very poor quality control, and since they have a very short travel distance, most people who bought this reported that the buttons almost constantly registered as pressed. And they're not cheap either, almost the same price as Yuan's buttons. Another example is this one. It is not transparent, it has a big travel distance, and the actuation point is actually very close to the bottom of the travel distance, so you almost have to press all the way down for the button to be registered. Worst of all, you can miss by just not pressing correctly. So here's a short summary in the form of table on screen. You can pause it and look at it if you want to. This video is made in collaboration with DFSS, aka Chaiji Master. He is the one who did most of the testing and provided the data for making this video. DFSS is well known in China for tweaking buttons that the Chinese maimai community loves. He has researched intensely about the buttons and is kind enough to share his findings with me. He has done repairing of cabinets and loves building games. Plays a bit of everything. His hobby is to find ways to improve the gameplay experience by modding what he can of the cabinets. So that kind of explains how he knows a lot about the buttons. Let's move on to... There are mainly 5 key components, or 6 if you're trying to fit into a certain controller. Let me first introduce the optical sensor and the metal piece. The metal piece is L-shaped. Some people call this the metal leaf. I personally like to call it the copper piece just because it's copper in color, and there are other ones out there that are silver, stainless steel, but that's not the point. Basically, in order for the buttons to be registered as pressed, I'm going to use the on and off terminology from here on out. On means pressed and off means not pressed. So basically the metal piece is just some sort of metal with some flexibility, but to a point where it will revert back to its shape when released. It maintains rigidity to a point where it can be tweaked, which we'll talk about in the next video. We're just focusing on introducing the characteristics of the component. This is the optical sensor. The optical sensor will always transmit light from one end to the other. So in between there's light here, and how it works is that it is considered the off state. The off state, remember, is not pressed. If the light in between is interrupted in any way, it will become on state. So you kind of can see how a key press works now. The metal piece, when pressed, will be bent, and this L-shaped end over here will be in the way of the optical sensor, just like this, causing the light in between the optical sensor to be interrupted, thus registering as a press. This white color plastic is the base. This is where most of the components rest on. So the optical sensor goes here, clipped into place with the base. The metal piece has two holes which are then screwed onto the base. There is also the plastic button itself. As you can see, there is a whole contraption at the bottom. And let me introduce to you the rod. So basically the rod is the one responsible for keeping the buttons in place between the button and the base, like this. Then there's the plastic frame, and of course the foam tape on the base. Now you may have noticed one component that I saved for last. That's because this component is non-existent in the official buttons. This is the PCB. It is responsible for emitting LED for the colors that you see on the buttons. The official one emits light through the cabinet, hence no need for this PCB. Only a certain controller has this because the controller itself does not emit light. You need this PCB for the LED. You can use the buttons without the PCB, of course, if you don't care about the lights at all. So basically that sums up the components of a button. Let's briefly go over the metal piece and the plastic. So this is basically the heart and soul of the button. There are also other types of metal piece on the market, but I'll just quickly mention a few. There's the official metal piece, not this one. The one that I have with me right now is copper colored, and it's developed by the very guy who provided me data for this video. DFSS's copper piece. Yuan's button by default uses this copper piece. It is more durable than the official one, and a bit more flexible to allow for tweaking to find your desired feeling. A brand new one would look like this. The surface of this should be smooth and flat. If it is well used, you see some bent mark like this one, for example. The metal piece that comes with the shitty buttons I mentioned earlier usually are the stainless steel type. They are thicker than the official ones and they require more strength to be pressed down. It's recommended that you tweak this type of metal piece before playing, or else you might find it unpleasant. We'll talk about tweaking in the next video. Okay, so the plastic. Let's first talk about Yuan's button. This one I have here is a rabbit one, but I'll just quickly demonstrate. You can see that buttons are curved in a way that is comfortable for you to spin. For Yuan's case, the curve is actually slightly taller than the official buttons. So this one is the rabbit I have, that is almost the same dimensions as the official one. So imagine that Yuan's buttons are slightly taller here around this area of the curve. Not only that, the curve, as highlighted on the image, is not as smooth of a rounded edge as the official or rabbit ones. It is slightly sharper, hence it makes spinning quite uncomfortable, at least for me. I've bruised my finger with that. So there's something to take note for people with a certain controller. Another thing is that, remember the shitty buttons I mentioned? Well, some of them during production do not carve out the side of the frame properly, like this side of the frame. So when the frame goes on, it actually presses the button down along, causing issues like shortened travel distance along with the actuation point, which results in the button always in the on state. So be aware when you purchase these kind of buttons. One simple solution is that you can just remove the sides yourself. But in general, just try to avoid getting these buttons in the first place. Well, that's it for today. For the next video, we will cover how to tweak the buttons to your liking, as well as how to maintain them. Very special thanks to DFSS for providing the data for making this video possible. If you'd like to support either one of us, I will try to come up with something in the next video. You can consider supporting us after watching the next video. Thank you for watching this.